Welcome to Starkey Sound Bites. I'm Dave Fabry, Starkey's Chief Hearing Health Officer and host of Starkey Sound Bites. So today, I'm honored to welcome someone who truly needs no introduction. And in fact, I think maybe Name That Tune would be something that would be a more appropriate game to play, given your impact on the music world. And your music really defined a generation, and it continues to influence people to this day. And particularly me, Paul, the legend, one of the most prolific singer-songwriters and performers of my lifetime, Paul Simon.
Thanks. I'm glad to have a conversation.
Well, I appreciate your sitting down to do this. And for our listeners, Paul is obviously an incredible musician, but some of you may not be aware that he also has a hearing loss that he's acquired in recent years. And really want to sit down for this conversation today to talk a bit about his music and the impact that he's made, about the stigma that still is associated for many with hearing loss and use of hearing aids. And with that, I think we'll just kick it off, Paul. Welcome to Sound Bites, and thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. As I mentioned, we first met a couple years ago, coming up on a couple years ago at Stanford.
Yes.
And Dr. Rob Jackler was seeing you, and he invited me to try to help assist with the difficulties posed by your hearing loss. And I know that when we met, your left ear had undergone a change, but did you have a hearing loss that you noticed prior to that time?
Yeah, it was probably gradually declining in the year before that. Mm-hmm. But first you've got some denial, whatever it is, it's not really, or it's not this. And then finally, I started to say, no, I really can't hear as well out of this ear.
Yeah.
What happened was, as I went around to as many doctors as were recommended, mm-hmm. I went to one doctor, and he suggested that he could fix it with a procedure, and the procedure didn't work at all, and then I lost almost all the hearing. Yeah. At that point, the hearing aids became really, absolutely essential. But for music, for the way I was used to playing and listening to music, getting used to hearing only from the right ear was very difficult. And I couldn't really do it if I put headphones on to sing. The sound was so different, where it was in my head and where my voice would fit into the sound. All of that was so different that I couldn't do it for a while. Gradually, I learned how to accommodate the change so that I could sing to a track, and I got that to the point where I can do that now. Mm-hmm. The difficulty, the other big loss in the panoply of hearing loss issues is that I've lost the sound of music sounding good, great.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound the way it used to sound. I've learned that I can accommodate to what the sound is now, but it's not anywhere near what it was. As far as getting used to that or adjusting to it, it takes some time, as you could imagine, and I think I went through a typical reorientation, starting with being depressed about it and frustrated, or there was nowhere to turn. I couldn't say, can you fix this? Can you do this? Because it couldn't.
Right.
So it was a question of getting used to the new parameters, and then it was a question of how much I could expand those parameters, say, to live performing.
Yes.
So I can't. You came to a rehearsal session.
I did it down in
about
Austin.
A year ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, it was actually. I can tell you exactly when it was, because if you'll recall, it was. And I wouldn't expect you to recall, but I recall. It was 3 days before my granddaughter was born.
Well, I remember that.
And,
that's right.
And I came down, and I was planning on staying a couple days, but the moment when I arrived in Austin at the airport, my daughter informed me she was in labor. And, and so I spent the night, and then I was with you when you were practicing the next day. As an aside, when I got on the plane this morning, my daughter informed me that she's having contractions with our second grandchild. So you brought great fortune onto our family.
There must be something about me that's,
I guess my grandchildren are born at the right time, and to quote your song. And I hope that the lyrics are true. I mean, I think of those lyrics all the time from that song, but I want to make sure that I'm quoting them properly. Never been lonely, never been lied to, never had to scuffle in fear, never denied to. And I'm hopeful for that for the future. But it's in that context that I was in Austin and watching you perform. You had some of the musicians that had performed with you on the album Graceland and continued.
Yeah, I had two guitars, bass, and drums. And I tried to tried to sing to the arrangements that we knew.
Yeah.
But the sound of electric guitars and drums are overwhelming.
Particularly to the left ear, I think, right? Or both, really.
No, they're overwhelming here because there's virtually nothing happening here.
Yeah.
So when I say overwhelming, I mean I can't hear. I can't hear accurately enough to place my voice where I would place it.
Right.
Normally, musically, so that I would be in a position to sing along with what was happening, and essentially make music. I mean, that's what you have to do if you want to make music. You have to listen and be part of the sound.
Well, and I saw that in action, and I saw, it was relatively, fresh at that time, I think, and you were still adjusting to this change. And unlike a lot of musicians, you have always used a wedge, correct? Or you've tried in-ear monitors over the years, but you've preferred a wedge in the past.
Yes, I never tried in-ear monitors in a show. I've tried them once or twice, and I don't like them. The reason I don't like them is they give you 2 or maybe 3 specific pieces of information. Whatever your instrument is, if it's the voice, I get to hear my voice. If I want to hear my voice and the guitar and the drums so I'm playing in rhythm and singing in rhythm, I can have that. But as a band leader, I always centered myself so that I could hear everybody playing, right. Because the way I feel about a band or an orchestra is that everybody's playing together. Mm-hmm. So if you have in ears and you're the guitarist and you've got your guitar way up so you can hear you really well, and you've got a little bit of something else, drums or a little bit of bass or something like that. Well, the bands that I was playing with were typically 9 to 11 players.
Yeah.
And nobody was isolated so that all they needed to know was what were they doing. So I would say your guitar part is being augmented, supplemented, colored by the piano. But you're not playing with the piano because you don't have the piano in your ear. So you're not getting the sound that I wrote, which is a combination of these sounds. You're just getting a great version of you playing accurately.
Right.
But if that's what a musician preferred, I'd say, well, of course, do what you prefer. But for me, I needed to hear everybody because during a performance or a sound check, I could be saying, what are you playing on trumpet there? What note are you playing? What note are you playing? Oh, well, why are you? You're not playing. We have to change that. And so I would change things because I could hear the total picture of sound. And gradually, if the tour was long enough, you would fix all the places where there were no communication between two instruments that you might normally think, well, they don't communicate. There's no reason. There's no reason for the trumpet to hear what's going on with any other instrument. But there might be a reason. It depends upon what it is that how I'm sculpting the sound. So that's why I always used a wedge. What happened with the hearing loss was that the distance between the wedge and my ear when I stood was a distance that made me not hear the wedge the way I wanted to.
Right.
And one of the big problems that I still have in my other aspects of life is things come out of volume that is fine, but I don't understand.
Yeah, it's
if I watch a movie and there's no subtitles, I'm missing a third of the dialogue or something, or like you mentioned the Saturday Night Live 50th performance. So, I had that worked out for my performance with
Sabrina Carpenter.
With Sabrina Carpenter. I had that worked out enough so that I could, hear it well enough to know that I was doing what needed to be right. But when I went to the audience for the rest of the show to be just an audience member, the volume was loud and it was fine, but I couldn't hear the jokes. I mean, people were laughing, but I didn't hear. I could hear the person talking, but I really couldn't repeat what they were saying. So, and that happens. That happens a lot, especially in occasions where there's a few people, like a dinner.
Yeah.
You know, at a restaurant is particularly difficult to hear. So it's not just, well, kick up the sound a little bit. It's also something that doesn't exist yet, which is a way of knowing what my ears are hearing and clarifying it to that degree.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons that I got involved with the Stanford Initiative to Cure Hearing Loss, because they were working on solutions to problems that I knew were my problem. For example, when the cochlea is damaged, as my case was,
Absolutely.
the cilia, the little hairs on the cochlea, they either fall or they die off. And so the sound, which enters your ear and then has three little bones that vibrate and sends that sound to the cochlea, the cochlea is not getting the sound and you can't hear. Well, until recently, they haven't been able to really study cilia because they didn't have an instrument that could magnify to the degree that was necessary. An X-ray or an MRI was not showing you these little hairs on the cochlea. And as you know, the cochlea is about that big an organ, a very small organ. And then there are all these hairs, thousands. And in order to assess what happened, they needed to have a picture of what the damage looked like. Well, they're very close. They have that now. I mean, when I was out there a few months ago, when CBS did, when Anthony Mason on CBS did a show on Sichel, we went into the laboratories and the scientists showed us what they were working on, which is absolutely fascinating, and just fascinating to me because after college, I never went into a science lab. I never went into a real laboratory
like a
where
wet
people
lab.
work. What does it look like? What do you have? So most of them have a monitor, and then they have this. I don't know what other to call it other than a microscope, but it's intensified so that they now can see these cilia. And now when I was there, they were trying to slowly probe, see if they could get an instrument near enough to the cilia, which I inferred from the effort that they reasoned that in order to fix it, we'd have to somehow, either touch it or perhaps some medicine into. They needed to get there, and they needed to see these cilia. And what they discovered, I mean, they were explaining it to me. It's that the cilia are in groups of 3, and they're in layers. And the lowest layers were conveying the lower sounds, and the middle was the complexity of this is so. It's so deep. You know, that as you get the information, the solution is inevitable, and that it's on the horizon, but how far away is the horizon?
Yeah, and that's really the challenge, as you know, is that the ears, you don't hear with your ears. The cochlea is providing that transduction, much like the piano that we have in here. The keyboard is laid out, what we'd say is tonotopically. The low notes are on the left side, the high notes are on the right side, and at the most peripheral, in your cochlea, they're laid out and organized, much like the keyboard on a piano. And with the stereocilia, as they're known, damaged or somewhere along that neural pathway. But in your case, the challenge, and you had tried hearing aids somewhat prior to when we met, and then we worked initially on crossing the sound over from the one side to the next. But as you've stated with that wedge, the problem is when and a lot of people take for granted. When I first became an audiologist, we fit one ear. Even if a person had a loss in measurable hearing in both ears, one ear was the standard of care. Now, virtually everyone that has residual hearing of some degree will often begin with amplification on both sides. But in your case, the degree of loss on that left ear is so extensive that it can't amplify, and then the problem is much in the same way that if you're fit with a monocle, you don't have depth perception, and you articulated it better than I can. When I watched you in Austin, when you were getting in the zone, I could see the frustration of not being able to pick out all of the instruments the way that you're used to doing, but there were these fleeting moments where I could see you start to compensate. And with the addition of vision and hearing together, and you could sort of see that they were playing, but it still doesn't sound like your brain, where the hearing really is taking place, wants to hear it. And I would imagine for somebody that has composed as many songs as you have, you know in your brain what you want to hear. In a normal hearing situation where there's no loss, sound is nutrition to the brain, but when in particular on the left side, it's like getting damaged inputs. It's like getting junk food rather than nutritious food that detracts from the stimulus.
You could think of it like this. There's 4 or 5%. There's a sound, but there's no clarity or anything. Yeah. It's as if you just heard street noise at a low level. So if you amplify it, you're not getting any information that is of value.
No.
You're just amplifying distortion.
Yeah. And that's really
the good thing about having some percentage of hearing loss that's some percentage that's not damaged is that it holds out the possibility of regenerative medicine being a solution to the problem. And we both know that that is going to be what the solution is. But they're far away. Well, it's every 5 years, we're 5 years away.
Right. That's what it feels like. As somebody that's been in this discipline for 42 years, it feels like we're ever so close. I've always said with hair cell regeneration, it's not simply like Rogaine for your ears. in that there's a neural process that they're connected to, and they're making incredible strides. And we have to be able to measure it in order to improve it, but it feels that way. Like every 5 years, we're still 5 years away.
Yeah. And then, aside from the cilia, that may be a component of the hearing loss, but it may not be the only reason.
Right.
There's a center in the brain, as you can explain better than I can. So that's where we hear. So once the cochlea gets its information, it sends it through this big nerve up into the center of your brain, and that completes the hearing process that began with the sound entering your ear and all of that. So, I don't know of the scientists who I'm friendly with at Stanford. I didn't know anybody who was studying the nerve to that center of the brain. I didn't know the other components, but there are at least several, and maybe more.
Yeah.
So what's coming is that we will find out how to use stem cells to regenerate. One of the interesting things that they said, among so many interesting things, I mean, as a musician, to be in the world of scientists is an absolute delight because it's so interesting. And I don't know anything about it. And I stopped thinking about the stuff that's driving me crazy, and I listen to this new information, and I think, these people live really interesting lives. The problems that they're solving are so they're so interesting and so important, So that process of stem cell rejuvenation, that's going to apply to the whole body.
Well,
one of the things that they pointed out to me was that there are creatures, some fish, amphibians, octopi, where if they lose an arm, it grows back. And there are quite a few examples and species of the beings having the capacity to regenerate, self-regenerate.
Okay.
We had that at one point, but we lost a lot of it in the evolutionary process, but not all of it. So what they're wondering is, can we regrow our ability to regenerate? You lose your hand, can we get it back where you can grow a hand? So that's in the future.
Yeah. Well, and even you talk about hair cell regeneration in some chickens and in some mice. They've been able to regenerate hair cells. And even I would point to in the human ear, if you recall, was there ever a time when you were doing a mic check or a sound check, or you're at a loud concert where there was a screech or some sound that made your ears ring or feel stuffy afterwards? Did you ever have?
I'm sure.
Yeah, probably somewhere along the way. There is a phenomenon called temporary threshold shift. We refer to it as TTS. And the ear will temporarily lose sensitivity, but within roughly a 24-hour time period, it will recover that sensitivity. So that regenerative process isn't gone. It's just that it often, that temporary decline over time for people that continuously, musicians are notorious for this, not folk musicians and people that don't play that play acoustic guitars rather than amplified guitars, but I know you do both. But for really high levels, sustained over a long period of time, the ear doesn't care whether it's machinery or music, it will cause damage. And undoubtedly, you've had some of that over the years from concerts that you've performed.
Oh, yeah, I have, even in the right ear, age-appropriate hearing loss. But
I do hate that term because it implies that age should come with hearing loss. But I think there are things.
Right, but that implication is not set in stone.
It's not set in stone.
It's just the way
it's typified.
We are aging. And so, in the whole study of geriatrics and aging and all of that, there's, I'm sure, many people who are investigating all of this. But just to go back to one little experiment.
Please.
In the when we visited the lab, in one of the lab rooms, the woman who was running the experiments was working with I think they were called eelfish.
Okay.
Anyway, the thing about them was they're tiny. But for the first, really small, but for the first 3 weeks of their life, they're completely transparent.
Okay.
So you can see everything. The brain, you can see everything. So she showed me this little experiment with a petri dish, and it had, I don't know, 100 of these tiny fish, and I mean, they're the size of a small ant.
Okay.
And she said, "Now look at this," and she hit the side of the dish so it rang, and like most of them were all the fish were just scurrying around doing all kinds of stuff, but there were like 6 or 7 weren't moving, and she said, "You see these 6 or 7? They're deaf. We can take them out and look at their brains and compare that to the hearing fish that are hearing and see what's going on." And then I don't know what it was, but they were able to inject a fluid into the water, and those fish regained their hearing. So the regaining of hearing is going to happen, and we really, really need it because, as Tina Stankovic has pointed out, about 1 in 7 people in the world have hearing loss.
Yeah, right now, and that's translating today to nearly 1 billion people with measurable hearing loss, and the World Health Organization says
more than 1 billion,
like 1.2 billion or so.
Yeah.
But though the World Health Organization says approximately 500 million have what is considered a disabling amount. So measurable is a huge percentage of the population, 1 in 7. But then with disabling degrees of hearing loss, almost 500 million people have lost that does today require some intervention. And I guess that's really an area I'd like to discuss a little, in the sense that it's often the case that we see people delaying the decision once they know that they have hearing loss. The grieving process, the denial, the stigma, I think, often results in a delay of 4 to 6 years to when they do something about it.
That's a pity.
And people in turn, going back to thinking about the ears are serving as sensors. And even in your case with the left ear, as you said, poor word recognition. But in the event that there are breakthroughs that occur, keeping that pathway stimulated, even with information that is, hardly desirable. In your case, it's not useful to word understanding, but it could be useful. And I would argue that it probably is useful because we started with a situation where we were routing the sound over, and then we switched to sort of lower level input on this side to at least give you spatial awareness. It's distorted, no question, but you could detect a sound over here, and the brain over time will learn to get those inputs from both sides, as distorted as it is. And I hope that in the event that if we keep stimulating this side, and if there is indeed a breakthrough that occurs in your lifetime, that will be better off than if we just simply let that ear dormant. And that's why I'm very reluctant to ever give up on ears.
That makes sense to me. And I never found the device that took the sound over and switched it. And I never found that really useful.
Yeah, that wasn't my first priority, my first choice either, but I wanted to begin where we were sort of saying, well, okay, right, that's what people had tried, but I do think stimulating this side is still keeping not only the cochlea and the hair cells, but the neural process and the higher pathways stimulated, so that if indeed there is a breakthrough, it means is that you don't use it, you lose it, and those pathways will in your brain be reallocated to other processes if we're not stimulating that with sound on that side. And that's why I've been rather adamant about just saying, let's, cautiously, let's try on that side. And then knowing that it's not that ideal perspective for you. And I know that you mentioned that composing, is there anything that you've seen? I mean, we talk about this was highly unexpected, where, you saw that change and then the change was made worse after intervention. But is there any way that you've seen that it's changed the way you compose? You always talk about in the past that music first, then lyrics. Is that changing at all? Or is the creative process changed as a result of the hearing loss?
Yes, the process has changed, but I'm sorry to say that, no, I don't compose.
Yeah.
I'm trying now to write a song, but the way that I used to write, which was to make some sort of either rhythmic or sonic context, and then just let my brain improvise over it. That doesn't work anymore because I can't manufacture a context that's conducive to wanting to try and. You don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it
doesn't sound the way it has.
Yeah. When I wrote whatever. I've always written whatever I wanted, and whatever genre or mix of genres I was interested in. I never had to do something because of a contract or anything. So it was all about the pleasure of this creative process. But at least for now, that's gone.
Yeah. I have heard you. I was fortunate enough.
Actually, I did write one song this year. No, two. I wrote two.
When I learned to play guitar, is that one?
Yeah, that one, which I haven't put that out.
Yeah.
But the other one was a duet I did with Edie called Bad Dream.
Okay.
And that was very good, a really good thing. Of course, the thing is now that when you put something out, nobody knows about it anyway. So in a way, it's the frustration just keeps going and going. But I'm going to try and perform live this spring. And the way that I'm going about doing it is, instead of just using a wedge at well, first of all, if I sit,
yes,
that's advantageous to me because the wedge over here is closer to my ear. And if they put another speaker,
yes,
not the size of those, but a good size speaker, so somewhere over here, I can say, yeah, no, I need more voice. No, let me hear more of that guitar. I can get a balance going. The other instruments that are part of, say, Seven Psalms or whatever other songs I choose from repertoire, they'll be occurring behind me somewhere, and I'll probably hear some kind of leakage, but what I'm thinking is I'm simply going to assume that they're doing exactly what a fine musician would do, and I'm just going to pay attention to how I sing these songs accompanied by two guitars and my own. And if I can do that and sing in tune, which actually I would have thought that intonation would have been altered or damaged, but it hasn't been. My pitch is pretty good.
Yeah, you mentioned Saturday Night Live with Sabrina Carpenter, and I thought your voice and her voice blended very well.
I could hear well enough to make my voice blend, and so can she, of course, because she has all her faculties of hearing. But so I'm hoping that with acoustic instruments and soft sounds, that even rhythm songs can have a power, because with rhythm, a lot of rhythm has to do with how loud you can play and boom, boom, but it's not really necessary. You can make a thing really swing with just one instrument. I mean, the bossa nova guitarists, they play great rhythm, and so anyway, that's what I have to try for. If I can do that, then I can perform some of my music, depending upon which sounds good.
Yes.
And so I'm really hoping that happens, because it'll be a big boost in my energy and morale to be able to go out and perform again. But I am not, even though I'm committed to all these shows, I can't say, I'm completely comfortable with the idea that I'm going to be able to pull this off.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am. And we really had so much content that we had to divide it into 2 episodes. In the next episode, we're going to focus on Paul's upcoming tour called A Quiet Celebration. Now, no matter what age you are, I know that you know some of his songs that have either been performed by him or remade and covered by other artists. Paul has been an influence in the generation my entire life, and I know you're going to enjoy the conversation, and I hope you go to his concert.